all the advanced sort of techniques that I love to use in some of my pictures with luminosity masks and doing certain blending and different things like that. None of it's possible if you don't fundamentally understand how layers work and how black and white are essential to Photoshop. Okay, so let's try and learn a little bit more about those fundamentals now. Okay, and I'm just going to open this image straight up into Photoshop itself. A beautiful morning in Connemara. Okay, so when we create an adjustment from this top level navigation in Photoshop, like if I hit adjustments, okay, I can create levels, and levels I can adjust, of course, like so. But when I create that adjustment, I don't have the ability to go back and retrospectively change it. Now I can go back in my history up here in the top right and remove it. That's fine. But what if I did image adjustments and I did hue and saturation first? And that's a bit crazy looking, but it doesn't matter. And I did adjustments and we did levels next. Okay. What if I wanted to remove the hue and saturation but leave the levels adjustment? Well, I'd have to go back in my history to prior to hue and saturation. Okay, but what if I'd done that down here in layers and I did hue and saturation and I did that crazy look again, and then next up I did levels from down the bottom here, and we created that levels, and we went, oh, maybe it's a tiny bit oversaturated, just on the edge of oversaturation, let's say. So I'm gonna, because I've done it on a layer, I don't have to just go back in my history. I can just go on to my hue and saturation layer and I can pull that back, but I can keep the levels adjustment. See that levels adjustment? I'm turning that eye on and off, which turns that levels adjustment on and off, or makes that levels adjustment visible, or not visible, I should say, is probably a better way to describe things. So working in layers generally is a non-destructive way to work. We are, when we're working in Lightroom or in Camera Raw, we are also working non-destructively. So that's not necessarily, the major benefit of working in layers versus what you can do in Lightroom or Photoshop, because you can always go back in and retweak the exposure slider or go back into the masking panel in Photoshop or Camera Raw or Lightroom. So that's not the major benefit of using layers, okay? But I just wanted to point that out as a starting point, all right? I'm just getting a question there from Sinead. Is it possible to watch this later if you have a meeting to attend? Sinead, you should definitely cancel the meeting, but it will be up on the Facebook Explore Light Facebook page for at least a week. So if you notice, guys, when I created this adjustment layers, there's this white thing on the right hand side of it, okay? And essentially what that is a layer mask, okay? And understanding layer masks, and again the context of white reveals and black conceals, this is the really important point, okay? So when we create any adjustment from down here, okay, we create it with a layer mask, okay? And that's actually a really useful thing for us, okay? So it's white, okay, so it's revealing the adjustment, okay, the levels adjustment. We turn it on and off, we can see it on the image. Now if I hit command or on a PC control and I inverted the layer mask, the mask would go black like it's just done, and the adjustment is now no longer visible. If I turn the eye on and off, it doesn't matter because the adjustment has been hidden by the black mask, okay? I'm going to go back a step. There we go. So white mask revealing the adjustment. If we add a black mask, it's hiding the adjustment. Okay, so these are the fundamentally important things. White is revealing and black is concealing. Okay, but let's take that on another few levels. Okay, and let's again just go back a couple of steps until I have my white mask. I'm just hitting command or control Z there to go back a couple of steps. What's great about these layer masks is we can reveal and conceal across the image in different places, We don't have to just add a black mask that hides everything. We can tweak those masks. So for example, we have a levels adjustment, we have a white mask on it. If I took a brush on this left hand side and I had the brush on black, okay, and my opacity is at 100%. We're going to talk about opacity in 2 minutes, okay? But at 100% opacity, brush on black, I can brush the adjustment out of the area where I don't want it to be part of the picture. I'm going to go back a step again. I can see I have my brush turned up really hard for demonstration purposes before, so I'm just going to turn that down and I'm just going to brush over with a smoother brush. Okay, that's much better. Excuse me. So if I turn that levels adjustment on and off now, you can see that the adjustment is just happening in the bottom of the picture because we removed it by brushing it out from the top. Have a look at the mask as well. It was totally white before, okay, but now it's black at the top and white at the bottom, okay, and that's because we brushed black onto a white mask which removed the adjustment from just that area, okay, and we can see that now. So let's take that a step further. Let's go back a few steps again. Okay, so now we have a white mask. Okay, if we invert it and hit Command I, we have a black mask. Okay, so now it's hiding the levels adjustment from the picture. But if I wanted to lighten the foreground now, essentially add that levels adjustment back in. If I keep my brush on black, like I did previously, and I brush on there, nothing is going to happen because I'm brushing black on black. Okay, but what I have to actually do is turn my brush to white. Okay, over in this left side, and now when I brush on it, look, the mask is now black on the top and white on the bottom. It's the exact same thing as the previous example, but we just did it the opposite way around. Before we had a white mask, okay, so that was showing all of the adjustment, and then with black we remove the adjustment from a certain part of the picture. In this scenario, we started off actually with a black mask, like so. Okay, the black mask is hiding the adjustment. We know that levels adjustment is under there, okay, and we want to show that levels adjustment in the picture. Because it's a black mask and it's hiding it, we have to get the brush on white and brush the adjustment into the area we want. The same thing, of course, will work on the whole multitude of layers. So Peter's asking me, how did I invert the color of the mask? I mentioned a couple of steps back, you just hit Command I or Control I on a PC. So you have to be stamped on the mask. You see the way there's a little box around it there? Okay, I'm on the hue and saturation one now. So let's say, I think you can do it up here as well. I'm pretty sure you can actually. There it is up there in the top level navigation. So image adjustments and invert. So it can be done from the top level, but that shortcut works really good. So make sure you're on the layer mask and hit Command I, look, and the hue and saturation is going to disappear out of the picture. Oliver's asking, what about Alt plus Delete? I think that will just delete it, but I'm not sure. That could be another shortcut that I'm not aware of. So I'm just going to hit Command I, and that's going to add a black mask to the saturation layer, which is now hidden. Okay, so the saturation, if you note guys, I just go back in the history, the saturation that was there a moment ago is now hidden. Okay, what if we wanted to add the saturation back into the land in the middle, but not have it in the sky, which would be a nice thing to do because saturated blue looks pretty horrible. So if we have the black mask, we take our brush, we have it on white, and now we can brush the saturation back into just this central area. That gives that a nice warmth and a nice lift, but it doesn't mess up the sky. And look at the mask, guys. It's white in the middle because it's revealing the saturation in the middle, and it's black top and bottom because it's concealing the saturation from top and bottom. The levels adjustment is white at the bottom and black at the top. If we turn that on and off, look, its adjustment is just being applied to the area that's white. Okay, now if we want to learn a little bit more about that, about what's happening, if we actually go on the mask here again and select the mask. You can see the little boxes around it. And what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to hold down Option and click on it. Okay, now this is going to show me the mask. Okay, show me what's happening with that layer mask. And you can see it quite clearly here. Okay, white is revealed and black is concealed. Okay, and if I just hit Option and click again, and I turn the eye on and off, white is revealed, which is the area that's adjusted at the bottom, and black is concealed, which is the sky at the top. Okay, so a lot of what happens in Photoshop with layer masks and blending and adjustments flows from having a fundamental understanding of being able to use layer masks. If we look at the next mask down, again I'm just going to click on that square and I'm going to Option click it, and you can see that's how that mask looks. Okay, white is being revealed to the center, black is being concealed top and bottom. Okay, any questions about that with the layer masks, or how black and white is relevant there? Maybe you all knew that. It's fundamental, but I find for a lot of people stepping into Photoshop, and again the purpose of this particular evening is that it's a core skills lesson, so it's to try and give people some foundational knowledge that will allow them to to be able to work a lot more effectively with masks. Okay, I don't have any questions, so I'm just going to assume implicit understanding there. That's absolutely fine. Okay, so I'm going to look at another aspect of things. Okay, I want to look at opacity and I want to look at brushes. Yarlet is asking me, do you use the standard brushes when painting in adjustments or special brushes? It looks like the edge is soft on the masks, is another comment from Deirdre. That's absolutely correct. So let's look at that in the context of brushes and opacity. Actually, that's a good segue into the next thing that we need to discuss. Okay, there's opacity and brushes. Okay. Okay, so what I'm just going to open up here. Malcolm is asking me, will grey do anything? So let's look at that in the context of opacity. Okay, grey can be useful to remove some aspects of your brushwork. But I want to keep it focused if I can on these fundamentals for the particulars of this session. Okay, so let's look at just this completely white canvas here. Okay. Now, I've got my brush selected, okay, I've got it on black. If I come over to my brush here, okay, and I turn the hardness right down, I have my brush mode on normal for this, okay, and I turn my hardness right down, that means the edges are going to be soft and feathered. So when I brush across it with 100% opacity, it makes things 100% black in places, but the edges of my brush are soft and feathered, okay. If I turn the opacity down, okay, to let's say 30%, 28%, now I brush down this bottom area, look, and I brush over again, you can see that the severity of change is much less extreme, okay, because I've turned down the opacity. So I'm only trying to brush in 28% is what is turned down to black rather than 100%, okay? And the brush is soft, as somebody commented on, okay? So have the hardness turned right down. Now if I take another sample, okay, and this time I'm going to turn the hardness right up, okay, and I'm going to turn the opacity up at 100% again, and I brush across the top, look at that, okay, and I'm going to go down the bottom, and there's 28% or something like that, somewhere in that region, and I do the same brushwork that we did in the previous one, 2 passes, like I did in the previous one, okay. Tonally, they should be reasonably similar, but look at all the feathering. Look at the difference between a soft brush and a hard brush, okay. And when we're editing our pictures here, okay, we will nearly always use a soft brush. Okay, you know, there's very few instances where I feel I need a hard brush. Sometimes I'll make the brush a little bit harder if it's bleeding into an area too severely, but 9 times out of 10 I have my brushes turned down on maximum softness. Okay, I have a standard brush and I have it turned down on maximum softness. The vast majority of the time I have my opacity turned down as well. So I'm working at 20-30% opacities. If some of you guys have probably watched my Simple Tools course, and one of the principles in that is to build edits up incrementally and gradually, and that for me runs through all of my workflow. If you try and remove things too aggressively, or you try and adjust things too aggressively, it becomes very obvious. Okay, so it's a really good idea on your brushes to have your opacity down a lower level and build the adjustments up gradually. Okay, so for example, and also for it to be soft. So to that point, when if I hit Option click on the mask again, you can see that because I used a brush which wasn't hard, you can see the edge of the adjustment is soft. Okay, and that practically manifests itself by there not being a hard line across this picture. Okay, we can tweak that. We can always tweak these adjustments, and we can do another example to make that point. Okay, I'm just going to put my brush on white up to 100%. So I'm going to remove this from the top. Okay, I've made the mask totally white again, so it's revealing the levels everywhere. Okay, if I want to bring that back in, I need to go to black. And I'm going to do that with a lower opacity. Okay, well actually, you know what, let's do it at 100% opacity with a hard brush. Look what happens. Not great, is it? Just slightly steppy, the line. I'm going to go back a couple of steps. Instead of using a 100% opacity, I'm going to bring in a lower opacity, say 20%, and I'm going to get a soft brush. Now I'm going to try and bring in the sky. Look how much better that is. Much more gradual, much more natural, and much more effective. Okay, so soft brushes, low opacity. Okay, that's build it up incrementally, and that's a really key point. The final thing I guess I want to discuss on this idea around opacity and a few of the things around brushes is that we can change the opacity of our brush, which shows you what you could see there, hopefully quite clearly, that when we have a stronger opacity, the brush is more severe, brushing in more, brushing out less, whatever way you want to look at it, but it's a stronger brush. Okay, but we also have opacity on our layers. Okay, so down here we have this levels adjustment, and if we turn it on and off, we can see how it's lifted the front of the picture, but we can also turn down the opacity of that levels adjustment. Okay, so I'm just going to click opacity here on the right, and I'm going to turn it down to, let's say, 50%. You can see, look, that's tweaking how much that adjustment affects the picture. I can turn it down to 0. That layer is no longer affecting the picture because I've put it on 0% opacity. We could, of course, also go back into the levels and tweak the adjustment at any point if we wanted to, but it's quite useful to be able to adjust the opacity of the layer. Sometimes what I'll do when I'm using an adjustment layer is I will add more adjustment than I need to, be more aggressive than I need to in that individual layer, knowing that I can come in and tweak the opacity down if that adjustment is too strong. So that's quite a useful thing to be able to do. I'm just going to take a little sip of water here, guys. Bear with me for a second. Sorry about that. So that's a couple of things around opacity, brushes, white reveals, black conceals, and you know that's such a common thing for me to use. So if I just take a quick look at this picture here, for example, okay, which is an image from Lake Baikal, and someone's asking me about the smoothing. I've just always left that as a default, Malcolm. I've never moved the smoothing. The main issue for me always with the brush is the hardness of it, as I said, and the opacity. And I find, for my own purposes, that those two aspects of it are enough for me to control it the way I want to. So let's take a look at maybe using this technique a little bit more practically. So look, if we take a look at this picture here, I would say that the sky is definitely too green here. It could do with some more warmth. So we could create an adjustment layer, and let's change color balance. Okay, and let's add quite a lot of red into this picture. Okay, and let's add some warmth. Okay, we can see that it's really got the sky kicked off, but it's not so good in the foreground. We have a white mask. We could take the brush on black and remove the adjustment from the foreground, like so. That's a 20% opacity, and just make a few passes of it. And now we just have the adjustment primarily on the sky. We have a little bit in the foreground and primarily on the sky. If I option click the mask, you can see what's happening there. Look, we can balance that out a little bit better. Okay, and option click again, and you can see the adjustment is primarily confined to the sky. What I tend to do more often, I have to say, with these types of adjustments that I'm building in like this, is I tend to hide them and then add back in. And that's, I guess, how my brain works for these sorts of things. But I find that when you're adding the adjustments in, you're generally working on a smaller area. So for example, in this picture, I want to, with this color balance adjustment, I want to just bring the color balance just to the sky. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit that Command or Control I, hide it, get my brush on white. The opacity is 20%. I'm going to make this 30, make it 40, because I want to bring it in, the majority of it into the sky. Soft brush, and there we go. And now we've brought that adjustment just into the sky. Now, there are many ways to do this. We could do this with a gradient in Lightroom, or radials, or brushes in Lightroom, or Camera Raw. So I'm not trying to suggest that if you want to warm your skies and you have a good technique in doing it in Lightroom, that you do it just this way. But what I am suggesting is, for the more advanced things in Photoshop, unless you know how these things work, you'll never be able to progress to the more complex things that you might want to learn in Photoshop. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of that file for now. I'm going to move on to another aspect of things. Any other questions, guys, about that? Does that help around using layers, using soft brushes, opacities of brushes, things like that? Yarlet is asking me, would I use a gradient to adjust the layer mask in Photoshop? Absolutely, I use the gradient all the time to adjust the layer mask. So essentially what Yarlet is asking is, I've just focused on brushes there, but let's say, for example, in this particular image that I wanted to lighten the picture, brightness and contrast. But as I lighten it, the foreground gets good, but the sky gets messed up. So what we've looked at so far is how we would use a brush to restore that detail. We have a white mask, we take our brush and we put it on black, and we can brush that sky back in. But using a gradient works really good, and I use gradients quite regularly for this sort of adjustment. I use them actually probably more regularly than brushes, but again, just in the interest of keeping things somewhat explanatory for people here, I haven't used it. But if I click on the gradient, which is this tool on the left hand side, I have to make sure my gradient is on black because I have a white mask. And here we go, gradient top to bottom, and back comes the sky. And if you look at the mask, it's done the same thing, you see, but watch the transition zone with the gradient. This is an interesting point about gradients versus brushes. Just going to hit option click. Look at that, it's a lovely transition there. You see the way that goes from black into lighter grey, and it works its way down. So gradients, particularly for adjusting skies, are absolutely fantastic. I will look at that a little bit later on, because I'm going to look at it in some detail at some point in next week's session. But actually, probably what I'm more likely to really do with something like that is to brighten it overall, let's say, and I've lost my sky, and then I'll actually hit select and select sky, and that will load the sky as a selection, which protects it from everything else. And then I'll use my gradient, and now I can bring back the sky without messing up the edges, and everything is hunky-dory in here. I'll do a little, I'm intending to do some basic blending in this session, so I will get to that as we go through things. But for now, what I wanted to get is some better understanding of how we remove stuff using the adjustment layers, how they're non-destructive. So they build on top of each other, and we can always go back and retrospectively adjust one. How when we create an adjustment layer, a layer mask is automatically present. Okay, it's a white mask. Okay, it's revealing the adjustment because it's a white mask. If we want to remove that adjustment from a part of the picture, we have to apply black to that mask. And it's interesting what Jarla brought up, because you don't just necessarily apply black with a brush. There's other ways to apply black, and a gradient is a great example. For me, 9 times out of 10, it's either a gradient or a brush that I'm using to work with the adjustment layers and the masks that are on them. So white reveals and black conceals, fundamentally important. Okay. Deirdre says that I'm good at explaining it. Thank you, Deirdre. I appreciate the positive feedback. If anybody has any questions on any of that, guys, feel free to throw it into the comments box, and I will do my best. Okay, so what were we going to discuss next? Okay, let's take a look at something around the pixel layers. Okay. And then let's finish up the session by showing you some practical examples of some things that are, potentially a little bit more useful to you guys. Okay. So I'm going to open up this TIFF file. This is actually a blend we're going to look at in a second. Okay. So we've looked at a couple of different types of layers here, okay, and we looked at when I duplicated the background layer. Okay, that was the first kind of aspect of things we did. We duplicated the background layer because we wanted all the information to be on that layer, okay, for the clone work that we were going to do and for that object removal work that we were going to do. Okay, so excuse me, in that situation we used a duplicated background layer. Okay, we also looked at how we create an adjustment layer and how white reveals and black conceals. Next though, I just want to discuss creating a layer that essentially has nothing in it. Okay, a pixel layer. Okay, so if I come down here and I just hit this plus icon, you can see a new layer is now above the bottom layer, but there's nothing inside that layer. Okay, so this is not a layer that you will potentially use that often, but I just want to highlight again the different aspects of how we might, the different types of layers that we might use in Photoshop. So one practical example, because there's nothing in this layer, okay, it's not doing anything. We can turn it on and off, but there's nothing in there, okay, because we just created a blank pixel layer. Okay, Catherine says, you've taught me more in this class than I've learned all year. Thank you so much, Catherine. I appreciate that. You're very kind. So what would I use an empty layer like this for? Well, as you might come to realize, we're going to put something in that layer. So that's a useful type of layer for adding something that doesn't exist already within the picture. Okay, and the practical example for me is a bit of dodging and burning. Okay, we can often do a little bit of dodging and burning with a pixel layer. Okay, so how I might do that on a picture like this. Okay, sometimes you'll see that nice feeling of warmth in different parts of people's pictures. Okay, and oftentimes what they've done is they've created a pixel layer like I've just shown you there. Okay, and they've taken a brush. Okay, and what they do is they turn that pixel layer to soft light. Okay, and when we turn the pixel layer to soft light, it's going to allow us to brush in a little bit of a lightening effect to different parts of the picture. Okay, so in this scenario, what I'm going to do, and this is how I would suggest you should do it, if you want to lighten certain parts of your picture on a pixel layer or give it that little warm sort of glow feeling, okay, set the color of the brush to a warm yellow, okay, more of an orange, let's say, and select a bright point in here within the colors, okay, like so, and click OK. And now what you can do on this pixel layer with a really, really low opacity, okay, we're talking like 2 or 3% here, you can start to brush in a little bit of warmth to certain parts of the picture. Okay, I'm going to turn the opacities on 1%. I'm going to turn it up a little bit higher, 4%. Okay, you can see, look how that's lightened it, and it's just created a little bit of feeling of warmth in those particular places. So that's a practical example of when you might use this pixel layer. When you want to add something that's not there, I'm brushing in a very, very light yellow color on a very, very low opacity to lighten certain parts of the picture, but also because I've chosen a light colored paint, but I've also chosen a warm colored paint. So it's warming and lightening at the same time. What's probably more likely to happen is that you will be doing something like that through a luminosity mask. So that will protect that. For example, you would select the highlights in a luminosity mask, and then you would brush warmth and light into them on a pixel layer. Jackie's saying she missed how that happened, so let me just do that again. I'm just going to delete it. Okay, we'll go back to the start. So I'm just going to press that plus symbol. That creates the new pixel layer. Okay, then I'm going to turn the pixel layer to soft light in the blend mode here, just above it. I'm going to get my brush over here and click OK. And with a low opacity, 3% I have, you can barely see it happening, and that's a good thing. A little bit more over here, and if I turn this on and off, you can see how that's just lightened a little bit in those areas and just warmed ever so slightly. Okay, so that's a little bit more, that's the final sort of point of discussion about the layers there. If anybody has any more questions on that, I'm happy to field them. That's no problem for repeating. Feel free to drop in any questions there, guys. So I'm going to, we'll probably be finished the session. I put 7 to 9 in just as a sort of, as a round number to give me plenty of time. But we will, I would say, end up finishing the session a little bit earlier. But I wanted to conclude by showing you a few practical things. You're asking how do you darken using a pixel layer. Well, you just do the opposite there, Mike. So you would, for example, if we open that up again, we can create the pixel layer, okay? And let's say if we wanted to darken those clouds and get into that area, so we've created the pixel layer, okay? We'll again switch it to soft light, okay? But we'll change the color, look, and we'll go towards the blues because those clouds are kind of blue, and we'll take a dark blue, let's say somewhere down there, okay, and with a low opacity start to brush it in. Again, this would be done most likely in a more controlled way, as I mentioned, with a mask, but if I turn this on and off, you can see the effect there now. Yeah, so it's just the exact opposite. Okay, John is going to revisit some shots from Scotland from last October. No worries, John, you're most welcome. So let me show you a couple of other things which are kind of fun. Like, again, the things that I've tried to show tonight are these sort of fundamental things, guys, that essentially you have to know these things before you can really move on in Photoshop. That's really, really important to fundamentally understand these aspects of the software. But I think it'd be nice to finish up by maybe showing you a couple of practical, cool things that these can lead to. Okay, so let's jump into it again and just finish off with something a little bit more interesting, I think. Okay, so we're back in Photoshop. And I need to find where my Facebook live feed is so I don't lose you all. Thanks, Eilish. I appreciate it. I'm glad you're enjoying it. Cheers. Cheers, Mike is there. That's great, guys. Okay. So the someone's asking me the advantage of using the pixel layer instead of a duplicate layer. Well, if you duplicate the background, you have Emer stuff in the layer, like you've duplicated the background. So it's an empty vessel essentially for you to work on when you use that empty pixel layer. Okay. Okay, let's come out of there for a second. And let's go back into. Okay, let's talk a little bit about blending for a second and how using these layers are important. Noreen's asking me using Photo Mechanic, is it easier than Bridge? It's not any easier than Bridge, Noreen. It's just faster. Is the honest answer. I use Photo Mechanic because it loads the files really quickly, and in a previous life. In a previous life, when I did a lot of weddings, particularly, it was so much quicker to use Photo Mechanic for viewing your files. Now, I have to say, even now, it still is a bit quicker, and I like sometimes to just plug my card in. I'm trying to get a quick file out or something like that. It's quicker, but look, for yourself, Noreen, I would say, for example, or for most people watching this, you're sitting down, you're in Lightroom, you've a bit of time on your hands to edit the pictures. You're not trying to knock these pictures out commercially or something like that. The little bit of extra speed it gives you is not worth the money that it costs, because I can't remember how much it is, but it's £100 or something like that. It's great. Is great, and if you want to splash out to have that little bit of extra speed, then fair enough. But it might not be necessary, is what I'd say. Thanks, Stephen. Appreciate the kind comment there. Somebody's asking me in the group, do you combine the two layers? So, look, this is a good question regarding the layers. So do you combine the layers? So if we go back to our dodge and burn situation, sorry, not our dodge and burn situation. If we go back to our removing objects section, look, this picture, for example, where I removed all the wires and the layer is still there. I saved the file, with the layer intact because I wanted to demonstrate that to you guys. If you've built up a load of layers, whether they're pixel layers, for dodging and burning, whether they're adjustment layers, blending layers, if you don't feel you're finished your edit, then you should save the file with the layers intact. Okay, because that allows you, when you open it back up again, to go in and tweak them. Okay, so if you feel you're not finished with the edit, when I'm finished with the edit, or when I feel I'm finished with the edit, I generally flatten the layers. Okay, and then I save it as a TIFF or a PSD file. You cannot save the layers intact on a JPEG. You can only, well, I'm sure there's probably other file formats you can save layers with, but PSD and TIFF are the primary ones that you can save them. Now, they're uncompressed files. JPEGs are compressed files. So lots of people are used to using JPEGs, but how I would often describe it is a JPEG. If you it's not as severe as this, but if you take a sponge in your hand and you squelch the sponge up into your hand, it'll contract into your fist, of course, and when you open up your hand again, the sponge will be the same size as before you compressed it, but a lot of the water will be gone, or all the water will be gone with a sponge. Now, JPEG is not that severe, but you do lose information every time you compress and open a JPEG. So a TIFF file is an uncompressed file, so it retains all the water, all the information, and it also allows you to keep your layers. I apologize. Long-winded explanations is a problem I have. So in the jigs and the reels of it, what I'm saying is flatten the shot if you think you're finished. Because it takes up a lot of space, leaving all the layers in there. And if you think you're going to want to go in and rework it a little bit more, you can keep the layers intact. If you want to flatten the shot, you just go up and hit Layer and Flatten Image. Okay, and if I hit Flatten Image, you'll see on the right hand side now, it's just one layer and it's all compressed together. Okay, so let's go back again, and where were we? We were in blending. Okay, so let's say, for example, we've been out shooting and we have two files, like so, that we want to combine. Okay, so we want to get this foreground and this sky merged together. Okay, knowing how to use layer masks and white reveals and black conceals is a really essential thing. So I'm going to open up the two files into Photoshop. Now I would normally do a bit of tweaking on the files before I blended them together, but I just want to show you again, this is about understanding white and black masks a little bit. We're going to do much more advanced stuff on masks next week, but this is the fundamentals that you need to know before you move on to class 2. Okay, so we have a lighter file and we have a darker file. Okay, what I'm going to do is I want to get this lighter file onto the darker file, and I want to have these layered up here together. There's various ways to do this. I find the easiest thing to do is just hit Command A, that selects the whole file, Command C, that copies it, okay, and then I go over to the darker file and I'll hit Command V. Okay, now that's dropped the lighter file on top of the darker file, and you can see down in our layers now we have the original background, which is the darker file, and we have the lighter file on top. Okay, point of order. Okay, I personally prefer having the light layer as the bottom layer. Okay, so the light layer is 9 times out of 10 the one that contains the majority of the information you want to work with. So for example, the foreground is bigger than the sky here. So I tend to put the light layer on the bottom. Sometimes I will suggest people do this the other way around for as they're just starting out, but for workflow purposes and doing things in a little bit more detail in this particular course, I'm going to put the light one on top, on the bottom. Oops, I need to unlock the background layer. That was locked. So light one on the bottom. Okay, now that's concealed now, okay, because what we're seeing is this dark image. This is above it, okay? So you can see the dark image is showing and the light image is hidden because the dark image is on top. Okay, Deirdre's asking me to repeat. Okay, so in terms of doing blending and building up adjustments like this, I like to have the lightest image on the bottom, Deirdre, okay, because I like to use black masks. Okay, so I have the light image on the bottom and then I build my adjustments up with black masks, and look how that works practically. Okay, so we have the light one on the bottom, the dark one on top. We can add a layer mask. Okay, before we were just creating adjustment layers and the layer mask was added automatically for us. But when we're working like this with two separate files that we want to combine, we need to add a layer mask, and hopefully you can see where I'm at down there in that bottom right. It's beside the symbol that looks like a yin and a yang. It's a little sort of rectangle symbol with a little dark circle in the middle, and it's add layer mask. And when I add a layer mask, you can see the layer mask appears like before when we did the previous examples, but this time it's white. So it's white. So what's it doing? It's revealing the darker image on top, okay, which is hiding the lighter image underneath. But how I like to do it personally is now I invert the white mask. So Command I, okay. So I'm always building from the lighter image up, okay. So I've got the light image on the bottom, the dark image on top, but I've used a black mask which is now hiding this top image. Okay, and now because I understand how the masks work, okay, and that white reveals and black conceals, it's very easy for me to bring in the sky and blend these files together. Okay, so black mask, let's do it with a gradient. Okay, select the gradient tool over here. We don't want the gradient to be on black because we have a white mask. I'm going to put the gradient on white, and I'm just going to pull it down, and bang, in comes the sky. Okay, look at the mask. White is being revealed and black is being concealed. I'd like a little bit more of that to come in, so I'm actually going to take a brush, okay, and the opacity was on 3%. I'm going to turn the opacity up to 40%. I need to do this on white because we had a black mask, and I'm just going to brush a little bit more of the sky in, like so. And now when we turn this on and off, we can see what's happened with the adjustment. Now I feel like that's gone a little bit too far, like it's spilled over the horizon line a little bit. That's okay. We know when we are on white on a black mask, we're bringing in the sky, but I want to bring out the adjustment. I've gone too far. So I'm going to switch the brush to black, and I'm going to make the brush a little bit smaller. And I'm going to come on here. You see it's getting lighter. It's removing the adjustment from that area. So a combination of my gradient, using the brush in black and white, I'm able to get the adjustment just where I want it. I'm able to get that sky in, and from here I can build further. So for example, I might say, well, the sky could do it being a little bit darker, but it's as dark as the file I brought in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do brightness, and I'm going to darken that down significantly. Okay, it's a white mask, so it's showing it. I'm going to hit Command I again. Now it's black, it's hiding the brightness contrast layer. I'm going to take my gradient, and on white, I'm going to bring the brightness and contrast layer just into the sky. And there we go. And that's a much better position to be in, isn't it? And if we look at our layers again, and we look at what's happened over here on the right hand side, Option click, you can see the masks feathered around the edge. This one's even more feathered. Okay. And we've built our adjustments on top of each other. And then we can just turn these eyes on and off nice and easily to see what's happened. Yeah, so that's a little bit more of a practical example of how to use this theory. I just have a question coming in there. Can you repeat the early step of getting the two images into the layers panel? Sure thing, Jerry. Look, there's lots of ways that you can get the images layered up. Actually, if you're a Lightroom user, what you can do is, let's just get two files here. If you're a Lightroom user, what you can always do is just select the two files that you want to edit in Photoshop as layers, and right click, edit in, and you can open as layers in Photoshop, and that will bring them automatically in as two layers into Photoshop. What I did, I'll just dump these for a second, is I took the two layers from Camera Raw, and I just had I took the two files in separately from Fundemenatls via Camera Raw, and I just hit Command A to the lighter one, Command C to copy it, and it doesn't matter which way we do this. Command V, paste it on there. Now I've made a little bit of an error there because I didn't go back far enough. Apologies, hold on. I had two light files. That's not very useful. Okay, here we go. Now we have two separate files. Command A, Command C to copy it, Command V to paste it on. Okay. So now we have the two layers. If they don't come in from Lightroom in the right order, or you copy and paste them the wrong way, the darker one on top of the light one, add the layer mask, invert it, get your gradient, put your gradient on white because it's a black mask, and bring it in like so. If it's not in as much as you'd like it to be, take your brush, add a little bit more in the brush, because the gradient is a very soft feathered way of bringing things in, and it's always a great start with the gradient, but oftentimes you need to tweak it a little bit with the brush. If you've spilt over too far, you can go on to black and remove the adjustment from that area. If you would really like to be more controlled about this, what I would suggest that you do once you've added the black mask is actually hit select and select sky. That will protect the lower part of the image. Get your gradient on white, and now we can be more aggressive with our gradient. Look, and that brings this guy right in there. Rebecca's asking me the difference between the gradient and the gradient map. I'm not sure, Rebecca, what the gradient map is. It's not something that I personally use, I'm afraid, so I'm afraid I can't shed any light on that. I'm sorry. So I'm just going to delete that for a second, and I'm just going to do one more little example of using the layers and a sort of practical thing for you guys, and then I'm going to finish up. Okay, here we go. So I wanted to look at just another file here, okay? I'm going to bring it into Camera Raw for a second. And just another example of using your layers and your layers masks for something practical. And this time it's chromatic aberration that I want to discuss, okay? Now chromatic aberration is a sort of like a, well, let me just show you. It's easier. You've probably, sorry Rebecca, I can see it that I can't be more help. Maybe the next time we meet, you can show me where the tool is, and maybe I'll be able to shed more light on it. So I'm in Camera Raw now, same as Lightroom. Look down the edge of this file. Can you see that red discoloration? And there's a little bit of green there along this point too, and there's more red down this area. Now what I would suggest that you all do in Camera Raw, okay, is that you have remove chromatic aberration clicked as a default, okay? So click remove chromatic aberration, and you can see it's ostensibly fixed this. There is a few little patches there and a few little patches there that are a little bit red on the edge, but it's done a great job. You should click remove chromatic aberration on every single image that you edit. In fact, you should set it up as a default in your preferences of either Lightroom or Photoshop, and that's beyond the remit of what I'm scheduled to do here today, but I think I did it in the previous Facebook Live video. You might see how you set that up as a preference, so that just makes sure that's always ticked. I'm going to turn it off because I want to show you how you can also do this in Photoshop for two reasons. Number one, because people forget a lot to click that and they don't have it clicked as a default, and then they go and print a picture and they get all this horrible chromatic aberration on their pictures, and it's really annoying. So that's the first problem with chromatic aberration, just a general forgetfulness to use this in Camera Raw or in Lightroom, or sometimes it can be so extreme it can be very difficult to actually remove. So even after ticking this little box here, we still have some left. So I'm going to open up this picture and again show you this little tip and show you why layers can be useful here and understanding of the masks, etc. So I'm going to duplicate the background layer here, okay? I'm going to make a copy of everything that's inside that bottom layer, okay? And I'm going to hit Filter, Blur, and Gaussian Blur, or Gaussian Blur, or Gaussian Blur, or I'm not sure. I'm going to hit that one. Okay, and I'm going to apply a radius of 20, okay, and click OK, and that's been applied to the background layer. You can see, you can see it's totally blurry. We can't see anything. It's not exactly done anything particularly constructive to the picture. But if I change the blend mode, okay, and we couldn't do this if we go back a step for a second, guys. Okay, we have filter, blur, Gaussian blur. Okay, we can apply a straight Gaussian blur to the picture, but if we haven't done this on a layer, we've no way to tweak that adjustment further. Okay, so again, there's another positive point of using these layers. So I'm going to duplicate the background layer again, filter, blur, and Gaussian blur, 20. Okay, as before. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to tweak this, and I'm going to change the blend mode to color. Now watch, remember all that funky color that was on the edges there a second ago? I'll turn it on, or it's on now. I'm going to turn it off. You see how it's got rid of all that really nicely? Look at all that chromatic aberration in there. Okay, so that's off now, and turn it on. See, it's gone. Okay, so that's a really effective way to get rid of your chromatic aberration if you forget to press the chromatic aberration button, which is quite common, or the chromatic aberration is not removed, which also happens. There's an additional chromatic aberration that you need to get rid of. Now, when we do that, okay, it can also mess with the overall color of the picture a little bit. So if we turn this on and off, it hasn't really affected the overall picture, I don't think. But if we understand layer masks, we can go a step further with this. So let's turn this off for a second. Okay, let's go right in there at it. Okay, turn it on. It has affected the color. You see that? It's got rid of the chromatic aberration, but it's also taken a little bit of color out of certain parts of the picture. So how I normally remove this chromatic aberration as an issue is I apply that Gaussian blur at 20 as I've just done, do it on a duplicated background layer, and then I add a layer mask, okay? And then I invert that layer mask, okay? And I make the layer mask black. So now it's hiding the adjustment. And now all I have to do is take my brush on white. This time I'm going to go 100% opacity because I want to get rid of all that chromatic aberration. And I'm just making my brush a little bit smaller here by using the bracket keys to make my brush smaller. And now I can just brush that chromatic aberration, look, just out of the sides. And it won't affect the color in any other part of the picture. And it can deal with some very little complex fringing issues that you can have in your pictures, and that's particularly prevalent, you see, when you try to print to a decent size. It's all good when it's going up on Facebook or when it's, you know, just being a web file, but you try and print your pictures big and you will have chromatic aberration problems unless you have, you know, either solved it in Camera Raw or done a technique like this. And I figured out how to do this because I printed one of my pictures big and I hadn't removed the chromatic aberration, and it created a huge problem. John is asking me, and we'll finish up with this question, John. Or well, people can ask more questions, but John's asking me about halos. So that won't work with halos. But if let me just open this shot and show you something about halos. Maybe I can create some halos here. I'm just going to pull the shadows right up and pull the highlights right down. Okay, it looks better, doesn't it? That's what most people do with their pictures. Okay, but when you do aggressive shadows and highlights, it creates halos. You see? A little bit of a halo there. Okay, and it's actually not even too bad on this picture, but you can see a little bit of it there. Okay, so aggressive shadows and highlights, while it improves the picture quite quickly, it creates haloing. Okay, so rather than, I don't use that particular technique for getting rid of the halos. What I actually do again is I duplicate the background layer and I get my clone stamp tool. I set it to black and I change the blend mode to darken. Okay, and when my blend mode is set to darken, okay, the cloning will only be applied to areas that are lighter than the area I've selected from. Okay, that's a bit of a mouthful, but basically what it means is that when you've got halos, you generally have this light area and a dark area in behind it. If I select from here, it cannot clone into the dark area because it's darker than the selection point. So now I can just brush along the edge with my clone stamp tool on darken, and it'll just quickly remove all that haloing. Look. And the haloing is created by that aggressive shadows adjustment, by the way, which is something that everybody does. Well, not everybody, but something you should not be doing is aggressively pulling your shadows like that, because it creates crazy halos. And you can see if I turn this on and off, look, it's just darkened right into the edge there without causing any major issues.